Ian, as I say, we've been travelling up and down the country. We've been hearing from different people. And some people are saying the state of this nation right now is absolutely fine. Some people are saying, as I mentioned, we're close to civil war. How does it feel for you in your personal experience?
I think this is a great country. It's a great country to live in. It's a great country to work in. If you're doing reasonably okay, I can't think of anywhere I'd rather live in the world. If you're not doing okay, yes, of course, there are big pockets of poverty up and down the country, but hasn't it always been thus? And it will always be thus, because I don't know a single country in the world where it's seen as this idyllic place to live, where everyone is rich, everyone has a good quality of life. Switzerland, I think, is probably the country that comes closest to it, but it has a very big underclass, which you don't often see very much of. Now, it's different in this country because we do see a lot of it, particularly on social media. And I think social media has enabled those who want to talk down this country to do so in a very loud way. And I think sometimes that their agenda seems to be winning out. But I can't think of anywhere else in the world I would rather live.
So, thank you for that. And when I was back with my family for 3 weeks, traveling also in London. And when I came to London, I was quite scared about having my phone stolen. I was very, very aware of it because my X feed, formerly known as Twitter, is full of phones getting nicked, among other things as well. You mentioned that social media thing. Is that an agenda from people, or is it people just using what's on there to further their agenda?
I think some of it is very politically motivated. You've got some very loud voices on the hard right, the far right, the extreme right, and they are three different things, I think. And no matter what a Labour government does, they are going to slag it off in the most extreme way they can think of. And I mean, I'm not a supporter of this Labour government. I think they've made some terrible mistakes in their first year in power. But I suppose in politics, in the media now, you have to exaggerate to get a voice. If you want to become a voice on Twitter, X, you have to exaggerate. You have to go to one extreme or another. And I think that's a very, very bad thing for political discourse. I wrote a book 6 years ago now called Why Can't We All Just Get Along? Shout less, listen more. Well, obviously it failed because our public discourse now is far worse than it ever was. And but even someone like me who sort of says we should all be nicer to each other, I mean, I find myself being sucked into it as well sometimes, because if people lie about me on social media, I'm going to hit back.
Yeah.
And not necessarily always very quietly.
Yeah.
So I think from that point of view, we are on a slippery slope. But this whole idea that London is this hotbed of crime, again, that has been promulgated by people who should know better, people who have an agenda against the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. And I understand why I don't support many of the things that he's done. And yes, there has been a bit of an epidemic of phone thefts. It happened to me about 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm not denying that. But overall, you're less likely to be a victim of serious crime in London than you are in most other capital cities. You're never going to have, London, I think, can lay claim to be capital of the world in many ways, in sort of arts, culture, entertainment, sport. But you're never going to get a capital city that is devoid of crime. So there are a lot of scaremongering stories going around, but really it's not like that.
Thanks, Ian. So we talked to a professor this morning who makes a pretty convincing case that the UK is heading for civil war. Not civil war with people in pikes and ranks shooting at each other, but some form of insurgency with some of those forces you're talking about, hard right, far right, extremist right, however you want to call them, or any other kind of spectrum, start to commit acts of violence. Is that absurd hyperbole, or do you think that's a potential scenario you could see happen?
Well, I do think it's absurd hyperbole at the moment. Who knows what might happen in 5 or 10 years' time? Look, anybody that predicts anything in politics nowadays is a fool. Because of what's happened over the last 10 or 15 years, not just in this country, but throughout the world. Are there seeds of societal discontent? Yes, there are. And I can see a scenario developing where you have people who think the Conservatives let them down over 14 years. If Labour doesn't deliver on the cost of living, immigration, one or two of their other major promises by the time of the next election, people think, well, why did we vote Labour? Why did we vote for change? That's what they promised us, and it's all stayed the same. So there, you're going to get a very fertile ground for a new force. Now, Nigel Farage is effectively laying claim to be the inheritor of that. And some of the things that he says I wince at because I think I'm not sure they're designed to foment the kind of unrest that you're talking about, but I think in effect they do. And this morning he did a press conference outlining how he would deport 24,000 illegal asylum seekers all at once. It's not going to happen. And so what he's doing is setting himself up for fall, because even if, say he did become Prime Minister after the next election, there is no way that he's going to be able to pull out of all the international treaties, change the laws in this country to enable him to do that. So then again, all of the people that thought, well, I don't like Labour, I don't like the Conservatives, let's give Nigel Farage a chance, even though I don't necessarily like him or agree with him, they're going to feel let down. So if you have a society and an electorate that feels let down by everyone, well, that is grounds for thinking, well, what comes after that? Now, I don't think this country is in that ballpark yet. I don't think it will. I certainly hope it doesn't. But you can't rule it out. I mean, if you do, you're being very complacent. And I certainly am not sitting here trying to talk up that possibility, but you can't rule it out.
Okay, thank you. It's I guess it's one of those things where you won't know it until it's happening in one sense.
No, and a lot of people think it is already happening to an extent. You see the protests that have been happening in Epping, the town I know very well-to-do town on the edge of London in Essex, very middle-class town, quite affluent, and they have this hotel that's been housing asylum seekers, 2 of whom have been accused of sexual assault. So local people have protested. Of course, these protests then attract undesirables from the far right who just want to attend any protest they can find. And then you have Nigel Farage and indeed Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, urging people to protest in their own areas outside migrant hotels. Now, I think that is hugely irresponsible, and you don't know where these things can lead, and I think party leaders should not be indulging in that game.
Yeah. What's at this Operation Raise the Flag? It's kind of grassroots, seemingly grassroots at least, campaign around the country for people to paint and put up the British flag, St George's Cross. How do you feel about that?
I find it difficult to criticise anybody that wants to put up either the Union Jack or the flag of St George. They are our national flag. I never understood why it is perfectly okay for Irish people, Welsh people, Scottish people to fly their flags. We think, oh, isn't that nice? And then when an English person does it, oh, you're a racist.
Yeah.
I would like the whole country to take part in this, because it then does reclaim the flag from those who would abuse it. So if I see a mini roundabout on a road being painted with the cross of St George, fine by me.
Yeah. We are in this ridiculous situation in this country where previously, at least, if you had a Union Jack in your garden or on your house, the vast majority of British people will come to the conclusion that you probably are possibly a racist and certainly conservative.
Well, I think the vast majority of people on the left think that.
Yeah.
People, I hate to generalise because there are some very patriotic people on the left, but it's the sort of Islington intellectual left that doesn't understand why people fly a flag. They're okay if it's a Palestinian flag, because obviously that makes them feel good, that they like to virtue signal. But if it's somebody saying, yeah, I am actually proud of my own country, I think we've done some fantastic things in world history, I think we're doing some fantastic things, and so I'm proud to fly my flag, they don't get it.
Yeah.
And that's where the right, I think, has got to be very careful, not to pander to the extreme right, but to make it socially acceptable around a dinner table for you to say, yes, I am proud to be English, or I'm proud to be British.
One of the strange situations we've got ourselves into is if you are a conservative-oriented person, expressing your conservative views, you're called far right. I'm sure you've had that label attached to you with a bunch of other
I mean, one day I'm far right, and the next week I'm a Liberal Democrat. Because, I mean, what do these terms right and left mean in 2025? They don't mean the same as they did in 1978, where it was effectively capitalism against communism, and capitalism eventually prevailed. Nowadays, I mean, I self-describe as being on the centre-right.
Yeah.
But I'm also a social liberal. Yeah. Now, I don't think there is anything left-wing about believing in equality for gay people, or sort of that there should be rights for trans people. Unfortunately, that agenda has gone way off beam now. So you're either, well, you're either anti-trans or you're not. I think I'm pro-trans, but then again, I'm also pro-women, and I mean, that puts you in. I mean, you get described as a TERF, or what? I mean, that's a ridiculous expression in many ways. So I don't like people being pigeonholed, because most people do not take a one. I mean, if there's a scale of 0 to 100, where 100 is right wing and 0 is left wing, most people are on a scale somewhere in the middle, or sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, most voters who don't think about politics 24 hours a day, like I and my colleagues do, they only think about voting at election time. And they're probably somewhere between 40 and 60 on that scale.
Yeah.
One time they might vote Conservative, the next time they might vote Labour. And I think there are very few people who would either be at 0 or 100. So politics has to be nuanced. You shouldn't, I mean, ideology can be a good thing, but it could also be a very bad thing.
Yeah.
And if you just stick to an ideology because you're afraid of being described as a bit of a lefty or a fascist, then you probably need to reevaluate your identity and how you want to express yourself.
So Ian, as you know, I come from Poland. I live in Poland. I've got 2 Polish daughters who are going through the Polish school system, and I can see how in Poland they're really helping children to understand what Polish national identity is, better or worse, giving them a very strong sense of where this country is coming from. I've been struck as I've travelled the country, how many people don't have an answer to the question, what is Britain and what are British values?
Yeah.
It seems to be a British value that no one has a clue what it is. What are British values?
Well, I think this is one of those questions where everyone, no matter what your country is, struggles to answer. It's a trite. I'm not avoiding the question, but you kind of know them when you see them, I suppose.
Yeah.
But if I say fairness is a British value, well, a French person is going to say, yeah, that's a French value too, actually.
Yeah.
I think what distinguishes Britain, I think our history distinguishes, and some people say our history undistinguishes. If you believe the British Empire was fundamentally evil, you're going to take that side of the line. I believe that there was good things about the British Empire as well as some bad things about the British Empire. Do we learn about those in schools? No, we don't. It's generally, oh, we were all terrible. And I think that's sad. I think if we're going to have people voting at 16 years old rather than 18, there needs to be a complete re-evaluation of what children are taught in school about Britain, about their own identity. And you can talk about sort of values of fairness, equality, democracy. I mean, all sorts of things you can talk about. But I think several of the things that do distinguish us are sort of our history in sport, for example. The fact that I think we've overtaken many other, certainly London has overtaken many other capital cities as a sort of cultural capital. Indeed, I never thought I would say this when I was growing up, but a culinary capital. I mean, you've got British chefs now working in Parisian restaurants. Is that a British value? It's not a value, but it's an achievement. And I think sometimes kids who are sort of, 9 to 15 ought to be learning about British achievement, not British exceptionalism. I mean, that's another phrase invented by the left to effectively deride our history. What have we achieved? The fact, does anybody watching this know that we have more Nobel Prize winners, I think, than any other country other than America? I think if you add most European countries together, they don't get to our total. Now, again, that's not a British value, but it's certainly a British achievement, which I reckon 1% of the country actually knows.
Yeah,
so why don't we learn these things in schools? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, some people would say that teachers, the entire education sector has been taken over by the left and has some people say neo-Marxist or neo-conservative, anti-British agenda, and we're seeing the fruits of it.
I think it's a lazy argument to say that the education system is entirely has been taken over or is riddled with ultra lefties and quasi-Marxists. My history teacher was certainly of that description, but he was a brilliant history teacher. And most brilliant teachers, they don't necessarily keep their views to themselves, but they don't try to indoctrinate their kids. I'm sure there are teachers up and down the country that maybe are doing that. I mean, teaching has always been a profession, and it is a profession that has attracted more people on the left. Well, that's the fault of the right. Why do more right-wing people not become teachers? I mean, that's if you think that's a problem, that's the solution. So it is up to government to an extent. It's up to head teachers to make sure that all our children have a balanced education, that they aren't indoctrinated one way or the other.
Thanks. So, as you know, I'm debating with my friend Guy, should I come back to the UK? And if there's one thing that would stop me, it would be tax. I don't like the tax system in the UK. How do you feel about the tax system? Do you think the amount that British people pay in tax is fair? Are they getting a good bang for their buck?
I am a small state, low tax conservative. I believe that a lot of taxation is licensed robbery. I think the worst kind of taxation is double taxation. Now, people have now started using the argument, oh, so you want to abolish VAT due because that's double taxation. You've already been taxed on your income. I mean, I think that is a lazy argument, but there are two taxes, which if I was abroad and thinking of coming back to this country, stamp duty. And what you get for paying your stamp duty. And certainly in London and the southeast, average house prices are now approaching £500,000. If you buy a house for £500,000, you are paying, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's like multiple tens of thousands in stamp duty.
It's a huge amount.
If you buy something that's over £1 million, I think it's now 5%. And that is criminal, I think.
Yeah.
Inheritance tax. My colleague on LBC, Lewis Goodall, seriously raised the possibility last week that inheritance tax should be 100%. Now, you've got two daughters. You come back to this country, you accumulate wealth through your own endeavours, and then when you die, it all goes to the state and nothing to your family. Now, to my mind, capitalism is about the trickling down of wealth through the generations. They say, oh, but they haven't done anything to earn it. So, their only argument is, oh, it's not fair that this person's got something and that person hasn't. Well, life isn't fair. 40% over 325,000 is the current inheritance tax rate. I think that's bad enough.
Like robbery.
I would actually, if I was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and thank God for the country I'm not, but if I was, that would be the first tax I would abolish because I think it is criminal. So there are all sorts of taxes that I would like to see cut or abolished. Our taxation rate generally is now the highest that it's been since the Second World War. Now, I could think of lots of things I would love to spend money on if I was in government, but in the end, it's very simple. You have two sources of revenue as a government. You have taxation and borrowing. We know we can't borrow anymore, so therefore they say, well, we then have to put up taxes. Well, there are ways of changing the tax system. So you reduce one tax and raise another, sort of giving with one hand, taking with the other. But that can make the system fairer. And I think that's what the government ought to be doing, rather than what I think it is going to do in the next budget and put up general taxes even further.
Which does feel to me like the one thing that could spin this country out of control. It doesn't feel like
in the end,
British people want to pay a single % more or a single penny more on their pound.
In the end, government is by consent. And if people feel that the government is out of control, that it doesn't understand the needs of so-called ordinary people, I hate that phrase, who considers themselves ordinary, then we are heading for a very bad situation. And the problem is that people say, well, the government says it wants to have growth, and yet they're introducing policies that are entirely the opposite of generating growth. Why is that? Well, it's partly because there's only one person in the cabinet that ever in their career has run a business. So is it any wonder that they introduce policies which business sees as anti-business? And within the first year, they've gone so far down that road that I don't think there's any turning back for them.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Okay, you don't have to have been a doctor or a nurse to be Secretary of State for Health. You don't need to have run a business to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. But I'm saying it probably helps.
So I'm wondering about Poland and if you've ever been to the country and what you know about Poland.
I've only ever been to Poland once, and that was to visit Auschwitz. And I
Oh, wow.
suspect that's probably the same for a lot of people in this country. I went with the Holocaust Educational Trust with a group of sixth formers. So that's my only first-hand experience of Poland.
What was the experience like of going to that place? It's
Well, it wasn't as, how could you describe an experience as good when you go to a concentration camp? I felt that it had become a tourist trap. I've been to several concentration camps in Germany, and there was always a certain atmosphere. Didn't get that there.
Yeah.
And yet you think of a number of people that were killed there, and it ought to have been like that. But somehow I left thinking this is not how to organise this.
I agree. I've done a video on that subject which got 10 million views talking about people's behaviour, but I've actually later on come to the conclusion that it's about, and I love the people who work there, I know some of them, it's about the way these people are prepared before they go, and it's actually the museum's responsibility to say, this is what we expect from you, here's what you need to know before you go in. I guess it's a very large camp, so it suffers somewhat from the huge numbers coming through.
Yeah.
But a simple 10-minute video before you went in about, hey, don't kiss by the crematoria, as I saw myself.
Yeah, and also maybe the kids need to be prepared back here before they go.
Yeah.
So I've always wanted to sort of spend more time in Poland, but it's just sort of never really happened.
Well-
I mean, I've got various Polish friends.
You're always welcome to come. We'd love to host you. Poland seems like a bit of a success story now. A lot of people talking about, for example, the Polish army getting bigger, playing a more increasing role in European security affairs. There's obviously
Yeah.
Ukraine as well. The boys say it's fine.
I think that's right. I mean, I was very surprised at the recent meeting in Washington that Poland, the Polish Prime Minister, wasn't one of the seven. I mean, you had the Prime Minister of Finland, President of Finland there. Now, with all due respect to Finland, is Finland, okay, it's on the front line against Russia, but is it as an important country as Poland in standing up to Russia? I would respectfully say no, it isn't. You look at the percentage of its GDP that Poland is now spending on its defences, an example to the rest of Europe. So I think Poland now has a right. I mean, we always talk about Britain, France, Germany, Italy, now Spain,
Yeah.
only recently though. I think Poland needs to be talked about in that group of countries rather than seen as sort of, oh, that country that's quite a long way away. We don't really know a lot about it. A lot of Polish people come here. That's all we really know.
Yeah.
So I think Poland deserves to maybe step up the international rankings a bit in diplomacy.
Final couple of questions. In Poland, people are concerned about the situation in Ukraine. We don't know what's going to happen with the ongoing negotiations. I'm sitting looking at Article 5, living in a country which is in NATO, thinking that the current Trump government wouldn't be too keen to set it in motion for a Baltic state, a faraway place of which we know nothing, as you said. Are you picking up on that vibe in the conversation we're having about Washington and London and security?
There's a Liberal Democrat MP, maybe you should talk to him, Mike Martin, who's my MP in Tunbridge Wells. I was originally going to stand against him at the last election, but that fell through for reasons which we don't need to go into. He is former British Army. He has, on Twitter a couple of months ago, he did a thread about his theory that if Putin gets the same way Ukraine, Estonia will be next. And he then posits this theory, that if that happens, Britain has, I think, 1,200 troops in Estonia. So Keir Starmer will be almost duty-bound to support an Estonian resistance against Russia. So what happens when he rings up Donald Trump and says, Donald, we need to invoke Article 5 for Estonia? And Donald Trump replies, where's Estonia? Because if Donald Trump doesn't agree to invoke Article 5, well, Britain can't go it alone. There are, I think, a few hundred French troops there too. That's the end of NATO.
Yeah.
And that's why I firmly believe that Putin will do this, because he's worked that out too. He's not a stupid man.
Yeah.
So that's why it is so important that America reverses its current policy. And if Putin annoys Trump too much, I can see that happening. And that Europe needs to step up to the plate even more than it already has done. I never really buy this thought about, well, we've got to increase our GDP percentage we spend of GDP on defence. If we believe that we need certain things to defend our countries, then we go and buy them. I don't care whether that means 3% of GDP, 5% of GDP. Did we think about GDP in the run-up to the Second World War? No, we didn't. And nor should we now. It's just for show, this GDP figure.
Okay. I'd love to ask more questions about this, but we've talked for a long time. Finally, as you know, we're talking about should we come back. We're looking at all the things we care about. We're talking to people about it as well. Ian, in your opinion, should I come back from Poland to the UK?
Well, how can I possibly make that recommendation to you? You're obviously thinking about it, and you've obviously got your own personal reasons for thinking about it. Since you left this country, it hasn't gone to the dogs. In many ways, in a lot of sectors, we're leading the world. I mean, if you've got any expertise in AI, you'll be very welcome in Britain, because we are someone told me the other day that our AI sector is bigger than the rest of Europe put together, second only to America. Our fintech sector is booming. There are lots of really good things about Britain. Yeah, we love talking ourselves down. And as Margaret Thatcher once said, we should stop bemoaning minis.
That's a great way to end the conversation. Thank you, Ian. Thank you.